Begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States
Recording in progress.
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome to the first of two public interviews for the position of Superintendent of Boston Public Schools, hosted by the Boston School Committee. I am Jerry Robinson, Chair of the Superintendent. I am not Jerry Robinson. I am Jerry Robinson, Chair of the Boston School Committee. We are offering interpretation today in the 9 BPS languages. The interpretation feature has been turned on. Please note that everyone needs to join a channel, including English speakers. If you want to listen to the conversation in English, please join the English channel by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. To support our American Sign Language interpreters, please name yourself before speaking. Participants, please note that if you would like to have the ASL interpreter box larger, you can pin this panelist by clicking on the 3 buttons in the top right of that box and select Pin. Today's meeting is being recorded to serve as a resource for school committee members and to make available for those who cannot be here today. The Superintendent Search Committee was tasked by the Boston School Committee to conduct a thorough search for our next leader. Beginning in March, they began by hosting a series of public listening sessions and community stakeholder meetings. The feedback voiced by students, families, educators, and other community partners was incorporated into the superintendent's job description and informed the search committee members' interview questions. Beginning with 34 candidates, the search committee narrowed the pool to 8 candidates throughout May and June and conducted several rounds of interviews with those candidates. On Friday, June 16th, the search committee conducted its final deliberations and voted to select a group of finalists for the school committee's consideration. 2 candidates have since withdrawn from the process prior to the start of the public interviews. 2 final candidates are Mary Skipper, Superintendent of Somerville Public Schools, and Dr. Tommy Welch, Region 1 School Superintendent at Boston Public Schools. Today's panel is with Mary Skipper, and tomorrow's will be with Dr. Tommy Welch. A little bit about today's agenda. We'll begin today's interview with an opening statement from the candidate. Each committee member has prepared 2 rounds of questions. The candidate will then have an opportunity to ask questions of the school committee. We'll wrap up by inviting the candidate to provide a closing statement. Let's get right to it. Today we welcome finalist Mary Skipper, Superintendent of Somerville Public Schools. I'll now invite Ms. Skipper to give a brief opening statement.
Thank you, Chair. So I thought it would be good to just begin with why I'm an educator, so that you have a sense of me as a person. I was raised by a single mom, and my mom almost didn't complete high school, and the one thing that she wanted for me was to get a good education. She felt it wasn't an option for her, and she had to work many jobs in order to support our family. And so when it came to me as an only child, I was raised in an extended family. She felt that education was my best shot. And so she did everything she could, as single moms do, to make sure I had what I had and to make sure I had access to education. And so when it became the chance to, and then along the way, teachers were surrogate parents to me. They played a deep role in my life, so many of them, and really transformed how I thought about education, what it meant. And when it came time to choosing a career, it didn't even feel like a choice. It felt like something that I just knew I needed to do. And so I became a teacher, actually here in Boston, And it was a pretty wonderful few years of teaching and getting to meet students and know students. And so then that sort of leads into why BPS. BPS has raised me. So this is where I learned to be a teacher. And as a teacher, I learned to be a caring leader. This is where I learned to be a principal. I had so many great opportunities here in the district to grow because people were willing to take risks on me and they were willing to invest in me. And as a result, I was able to create with a team Tech Boston Academy, and that became my home in Dorchester for 11 years. And at that school, as a principal, I really learned to be a servant leader. I really learned to be outward facing to my families, to my students, and I learned the power of when community and families and students and educators come together, what makes possible for students. And we had many great memories at Tech Boston, which included changes in the school and the surrounding fields that really allowed our students to flourish in a way that they had never before. And that school inherited schools and became a bigger school, and each time took its love and culture and embraced a new school. And that was the Wilson, and then it was eventually Dorchester Academy, and so forth. In that process, I learned about collaborative leadership, because the year that I opened the school was the same year I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I was not able to do that myself. I realized how I would need to lean on my teachers and my students and my parents in a way that only a sense of urgency creates. But it happened, and the production of what happened was a school that to this day I'm very proud of and still continues to serve our community. And then came the decision to leave Tech Boston, bless you, to leave Tech Boston and to move into a district role. And that was exciting for me because I was able to take some of the things I had learned in the principalship and apply it with my colleagues to the other high schools. And that network team that also included adult ed and ed options, that whole team here in Central and in the schools worked across 36 schools, across 19,000 students in all the different shapes and sizes of our schools to really take on some very hard issues around dropout and graduation rate and rising vigor, and really came together and taught me how to be a collaborative leader. And one of the biggest decisions when I left was leaving Boston to go to another district. And the district I went to was Somerville. And I grew up in the Arlington-Somerville area, so in many ways it was like going back in childhood to the place that you grow up. And I knew I had to do it, as difficult of a decision as it was, because I was somebody that would have stayed in Boston my whole career. But I chose to do that because I knew I needed to be the superintendent. I knew I needed to get the experience of actually being a superintendent, so that if either I would have finished my career there or would have come back to Boston, I would learn the value of working directly with a school committee, directly with policymakers, directly with the city, building those relationships, building those coalitions that you have the power to change and make a much more equal playing field for our students. And so that's been a lot of the work in Somerville, has been at the policy level of really taking on a lot of the DEI initiatives and walking the walk of what that means as policymakers with them. But now, having seen sort of where BPS is, I've spent a long time thinking about this, and I feel like I can come back and I can make a difference. But I have to do it with a team. And so it kind of, this is me as a builder, because that's at day's end what I am. I'm a builder. I build trust. I am very transparent. I like good communication. I like to work with the community and families and students directly, and my teams. And so I will build trust back. I like to build teams because that's what impacts students. And so a big goal here would be re-engaging and restructuring in ways that allow our teams to be most effective for our students and their outcomes. I also believe in village. And so I would build a coalition. And that's pretty easy in Boston, given there's so much resource. But that resource doesn't translate evenly to everyone. And so we need to work in a coalition with our nonprofits and our philanthropic, our post-secondary, and our businesses, all for one reason, and that's our students. And then finally, it's building a vision, which I love to do. And the vision comes from working together on those teams, together in that coalition. It's not a vision one leader brings in, it's a vision that's developed. So that's me, and that's what I hope, if I'm selected, to be able to begin to work on here in BPS. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Skipper. At this time, I invite Dr. Alkins to kick us off with the first question.
All right. Thank you for your opening statement. So it's very interesting that you particularly brought up DEI initiatives and sort of walking the walk with that. So this question is in that vein. Improving specifically Black student achievement is and has always been a stated objective of BPS for years. It has aimed to eliminate opportunity and achievement gaps via numerous initiatives that include improvement of teacher recruitment, quality, cultural responsive pedagogy and curriculum, analysis of the student weight and funding formula, social emotional support to Black students, and all of this with the intent to help Black students specifically mitigate the host of social factors that compromise their engagement and their ability to contribute, or the things that contribute to compromise engagement and also contribute to social inequity, and evaluation and the eradication of policies and practices that are rooted in systemic racism. Results, however, over the years have largely remained the same, and in some cases even worsened. And while I understand that there's no magic bullet, would you please speak to the specific strategies that you have utilized that have resulted in successful outcomes for Black students, and what were those outcomes and measures, and how did you address systemic racism within your previous experience for learners or for your workforce, and how do you plan to address it here?
Sure. So first of all, I appreciate the question. And this is an area that I would very much welcome working with yourself and others on the board who have expertise in this area. That's the value kind of the board. But for my particular piece, so at Tech Boston, vast majority of 98% of our students were students of color, Black and brown. And we had a larger concentration of boys of color. So right from the start, our work at Tech Boston had to be about the achievement gap, the opportunity gap, and about creating opportunities and figuring out for our young men of color why it wasn't, the current system wasn't working. And that began in a lot of different strategies. I think the hiring is key in making sure that your staff is diverse and has experience sets that the students can relate to. Mentorships, working across families, seeing role models of who they can emulate and grow up to be, and connect with, who come from the areas and the neighborhoods that they come from. These were all components of how we did hiring, looking for that. I think secondly, data. We used data really closely to look at students when they were coming in and to be able to identify on the academic side, what were those actual gaps? What did they look like? Where were they? Literacy was a big one. Numeracy was another. And sometimes these were gaps that extended far back. And so we did very deliberate programming. We brought in Calculus Project as one of our solution sets to be able to work with our young men and women of color to be able to accelerate, not just eliminate, but to accelerate and to build confidence in the area of math so that they could see themselves as mathematicians. And that led to their being able to really just shine when it came to some of our more advanced courses. I think we brought in other kinds of programming that were social emotional programming. BAM is one that I used here in Boston and then used in Somerville as a way to be able to really connect with our students of color and give them the support to be able to have safe space to talk, to process the trauma that they go through, and to use as a resource. And so it's a lot of these things working in concert together that allowed us at Tech Boston and then certainly in Somerville to move the needle academically, cut down dropout, because for our black boys, that was a big problem, was specifically dropout. But more importantly, graduation, and more importantly than that, persistence. So being able to leave high school, have the skills, the tangible skills, have the additional support after leaving high school to go on and be able to complete college. So I would be looking at what is currently in place, validating that and sort of saying what is working and what is not working in which schools and which areas, oversubscription in special education, how we identify behavior and the bias that goes into that, substantially separate programming that traps a lot of our black and brown boys in particular. Those would all be areas that I would be looking at where you sort of see it in there. So it's really a menu of things that I would be looking at and across. But we were able, both in Somerville and then certainly at Tech Boston and even in the high school network, when we worked on the dropout rate, there were two groups that we were working with, and that was our black boys and our overaged ELL students coming in learning English for the first time. And there were no good solutions at the time for them when they were off track. And so we built those solutions as part of the network to allow them to accelerate learning, to re-engage, to be motivated, to get mentorship, to cut down on chronic absenteeism, all of the things that would lead to them ultimately dropping out and instead stay in school.
Thank you. Ms. Lapiro will ask the next question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's good to see you, Ms. Skipper. I don't want to confuse the translators, so I'm going to start with my piece in Spanish, and then I will do my own translation in English. El lenguaje más hablado en nuestro distrito, fuera de inglés, es el español. Y por lo tanto, empezaré esta pregunta en particular en español. Me gustaría saber qué ha hecho para crear asociaciones positivas con estudiantes, familias y miembros de la comunidad que hablan otro idioma. ¿Qué estrategias utilizó? ¿Qué programas ha desarrollado? Y por favor, provee ejemplos específicos de cómo trabaja con comunidades de culturas y lenguajes diversos para incluir y empoderar a todos en el sistema educativo. También describa cómo sabe que funcionó, cómo eran las asociaciones antes de su trabajo y después. The language that is most spoken in our district other than English is Spanish. For that reason, I am starting this particular question in Spanish. I would like to know what you have done to create positive partnerships with students, families, and community members who speak a language other than English. What strategies have you used? What programmatic offerings have you developed? And please provide specific examples of how you engage with communities of diverse cultural and linguistic backgrounds to include and empower everyone in our educational system. Most importantly, I'd like to hear, did it work? What was it like before you implemented your strategies, and what did it look like after?
Great, thank you, I appreciate that question. So I'll use Somerville since it's most recent. So in Somerville, we're more than 50% where our families and our students speak a language other than English as their first language. And it was clear to me that there was a barrier because when I interviewed as the superintendent, there was not one parent that spoke a language other than English in parts of the process. So when I became superintendent, I kind of pulled together our team and talked with our SFLC, which is our family engagement, and really tried to understand the barriers that our families were facing. Since that time, we've been able to implement quite a bit. So one, in terms of the partnership piece. So we've hired full-time liaisons in each of the schools, most of whom are bilingual, and we speak Spanish and Portuguese are our two dominant languages. And that has opened things up greatly for our families, just in terms of even access to things in the schools, because they have somebody to be able to communicate with right off the bat. many of our job postings now, we have moved to where bilingual is required as opposed to preferred, again with Portuguese and Spanish being the dominant languages. That has translated into a much more diverse diversity of linguistic in the district. And that, again, has built up our capacity. We were having difficulty enrolling students in some of our out-of-school time, and I've spoken about this a number of times today, which is that, for all the opportunities we offer in the out-of-school time, when you actually look at who's able to take advantage of it, who is taking advantage of it, and oftentimes it's not our special education students and it's not our ELL students. And that can often be an access barrier. Sometimes it's just on the, using technology and families don't know or they're not available. So we partnered with a local advocacy group that's wonderful, Padres Latinos, and through our partnership, and it was a very blunt partnership, they were very honest about the barriers our families were facing. We were able to do a single registration system in which they would help us and we would get interpreters for the sessions and make sure that everything was translated appropriately, and additionally save some spots for students in the out-of-school time programming for parents who couldn't access because of language. And so it's in these ways that we're attempting to make sure that our ELL learners, that our ELL students, and our parents and families could begin to take full access of what we have to offer in the district. I think in terms of the programming, we've made heavy investments, more so than at any time, particularly in our Sheltered English Immersion, in our SLIFE programming for our interrupted learners. We have definitely seen that students coming in from the pandemic, not only are they academically struggling because they have gaps in the academics, but more severely with trauma. They've just experienced so much trauma that it's compromising their ability to access. So we've reconstructed the program and added bilingual adjustment counselors in multiple schools that have SLIFE programming and actually have on the student grids the services to provide them. So in addition to the academic, we're also giving the social emotional. We've also done extensive training for our teachers in Gen Ed, which allows our students who are leaving Sheltered English Immersion and moving on in levels 4 and 5 to be able to have better access to the academics. We added the seal of biliteracy, and I've seen it go up in number, over time, and that has seemed pretty powerful because now we see it as we're so proud of this, and for students to be able to be proficient in their native language and in English is something that really needs to be celebrated. So these have all been things that from the community and listening to the community and holding working sessions with the community where we would have interpreters and then the engagement specialists would help with this. We would ask the community how to, what was their priorities, and we would do this pre-COVID annually. During COVID, it was difficult, but we would try to gain as much information and resource from the community as possible so we could break down those barriers and exact change.
Thank you, appreciate that. Madam Chair, I have a follow-up, would it be okay? Thank you. So you mentioned the piece around some of the language access, especially with multilingual learners moving out of sheltered immersion. So within BPS currently, we have a handful of dual language schools. The reality is they don't serve anywhere near the number of multilingual learners that we actually have. So our district has adopted a policy around native language instruction. Mm-hmm. What experience can you speak to in actually operationalizing native language instruction so that our students that are not just in our dual language programming have access to their own native language and that asset-based learning, but then also continuing to develop their English skills as well. So are you committed to operationalizing a policy that does want to provide native language instruction to our students? And two, how would you expand those services to multilingual learners? And if you could provide any data of experience that you have around that.
Sure. So yes, I am committed. I think in our case, and I can speak to the work in Somerville, the work that was here in Boston was, it sounds like, more outdated than where we are now. But in Somerville, we made significant changes. We have a dual immersion program. We made changes so that it was actually our ELL students who could access that, because we were finding that many of our native English speakers who also happened to know Spanish were getting greater access to the programming than actually our ELL students. So we made significant changes through school committee and enrollment to that, and that has actually allowed a better balancing. In terms
But just
of
in addition to the dual language program.
correct,
Yeah.
correct. In terms of the native language component, so we've restructured away from SEI 1s and 2s being integrated, and now they're in newcomer programming. And that started particularly at our high school, where we've actually created an entire newcomer academy at the high school. We had about a 300% increase in newcomers this year alone. And so that program has staff who are bilingual, but also they have staff specifically in the social emotional side who are bilingual. And we found that was particularly important because for students to receive counseling services from somebody that could only speak English was not useful or impactful. So we've made a very concentrated effort to take our newcomers and provide them with a very different experience than they had ever had in the past. And then similarly at our middle grades school, we've done the same thing with our newcomer academy. We have SLIFE programming that is in 3 different locations right now, and again, with a lot of concentrated resource for our SLIFE students.
Got it. And then, sorry, I will hold back.
You'll have another round.
Yes, I know. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. Ms. Polanco Garcia will ask the next question.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Gracias por la introducción. Yo quiero continuar con el idioma nativo, porque es algo que en lo particular nos toca mucho a nosotros, los padres inmigrantes.
I would like to continue speaking in my native language because this is what we have to use when we migrate to the United States.
Los padres hemos tenido una lucha de mucho tiempo para que nuestros hijos puedan ser alfabetizados en su idioma nativo.
As parents, we've had a big struggle with our kids so that they can be alphabetized in their native language.
Y la razón es porque nosotros debemos abrazar también nuestra cultura y esa identidad cultural que deben tener nuestros estudiantes e inmigrantes es importante que no se pierda.
And we need to embrace our culture, embrace our identity, and it's very important that we continue to impact our identity.
Durante muchos años, BPS se vio obligado a operar en un estado de enmienda que exigía la inmersión en inglés.
For many years, BPS was forced to operate in an amendment state that required English immersion.
Afortunadamente, hace 4 años, el Estado aprobó la ley LUC, que nuevamente brindó la oportunidad de usar el idioma nativo en la educación de los estudiantes de inglés multilingüe.
Fortunately, 4 years ago, the state passed the LUC Act, which again provided the opportunity to use the native language in the education of English learners multilingual.
Me gustaría saber cuál es su filosofía y compromiso para brindar el acceso al idioma nativo y la alfabetización en el idioma nativo.
I would like to know what is your philosophy and commitment to providing native language access to native language literacy?
En su respuesta me gustaría que también describiera qué programas para aprendices del idioma inglés usted ha supervisado, cuál ha sido la experiencia y qué ha traído de cambio al sistema.
In your response, please describe any English learners programs you have supervised and any experience you've had in changing school system from one focus to another.
Thank you. So I have not been directly involved where a school system's gone from being a sheltered English immersion into a native. Excuse me. It was brought up multiple times in the family meeting earlier, and it seems like here that is a really important piece. And this is an area where I need to learn what the community wants. And I think, yourself and other advocates in the community, it would be important for me to hear that from and to listen so that the decisions that we're making reflect something that the community values. So from a commitment standpoint, what I would say is, if that is something that the community is really looking to do, then I would clearly help support that and make that happen. I just don't, in my career, have that particular experience. I have experience supporting large programming in SEI, and transitional bilingual was happening right before I kind of came into teaching here. But that would be something that I would see as a partnership that we would have to work together on and to make happen with our team. But if it is something that the community feels really strongly about and educationally is sound, which it is, then I would fully support it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Tron, you'll ask the next question.
Sure. Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well.
People have different.
Mr. Tron, I'm sorry, your microphone?
I'm sorry.
Your-
Sorry.
Thank you.
You can hear me now, right?
I can.
Okay. People have different definition and understanding of equity. But one way or another, the underlying commonality of equity remains the same. I'm interested to know, as a policy maker and a policy applicator, what is your own definition of equity? And please give us one of your better or best experience in applying your own definition of equity into educational programming.
Sure, thank you, I appreciate that. So when I went into Somerville, I heard we use the word equity quite often. And what I found was that people often will confuse equality and equity, or everybody getting the same, versus those that need more or haven't gotten more getting what they need. And for me, the last 7 years has been a journey with school committee in a very positive way of unpacking that in policy. When we first began it, it was a lot of conversation about it. But where it really matters is where it plays out in policy and where it plays out in practice. So examples of that can be resource and funding, and how resource and funding is driven, ensuring that, when you have where your funding is, that it's going to the students who have the most need, who have been traditionally marginalized, who may be, who likely have achievement gap and opportunity gap, and redirecting the funding away from some things to those things. That's a choice. That's a deliberateness. That's a decision. And so in my career, that's been my decision. And I think with school committee in Somerville, that's been something we've worked on to have happen. I also think from a programming standpoint, there's just, concrete. I mean, the issue with, students getting access to higher level math classes. There was, clearly unpacking we had to do, where we were looking at students who, particularly 6th, 7th, 8th grade, and particularly our Black and Brown students, who, for a variety of reasons, were not getting access to upper level math. And as a result, they were being shut out on the AP side from being able to have access to honors or rigorous coursework. We've since made a number of changes, bringing in programming like the Calculus Project, but also making changes in the way courses are taught. We do some blended courses where students can actually elect an honors as opposed to being chosen for honors, so they have some opportunity themselves to be able to do that, and also detracking how students are recommended for those upper level classes. we went back and we redid so that it wasn't so much observational or strictly assessment data, but rather that it was grade and combination of teacher input and student input. So that has resulted tremendously in more of our students of color getting access to higher level math classes, and then going on, and obviously that's a gateway in itself to being able to access higher level science classes, early college, and so forth. So it really, in my experience, equity is a word that people have different meanings about, but it's ultra important that when it comes to how it impacts students in the sense of practice and policy, that there's a uniform understanding of it, that it's part of the vision, and that you continually refer back to that vision and that commitment at the school committee level, at the district level, so that when hard decisions need to be made, you're grounded in those decisions. And that's been a process. And I think my school committee would say the same thing. It's been a process. The community can have different understanding. Sometimes you can have parts of the community that will speak out about it. And you just have to stay true to ensuring our goal is to remove the barriers for the students who have been marginalized and harmed. And that often means shifting what would have been to everyone to some, and making that deliberate choice. So that's been my experience, that I think has played out a number of times in my career, but most recently in Somerville.
Could I have an addendum?
Go ahead.
Just an addendum to my question.
Sure.
Given your own definition of equity, I share that. But let's just say that in public hearing, in a public process, of course, different group, different committee, different community have differing views on certain programs that you have applied your own equity understanding and equity application to the program, but different group have expressed different view.
Mm-hmm.
I gather that you have already experienced that in your own Somerville public school.
Yes.
How do you deal with that?
Well, first, I think it's important to show people data. So we use the data to be able to say, here's the fact, here's the data, here's what's happening. And then from that, we go back and we reaffirm our commitment and our mission, which in our case, in the Somerville Public Schools, we passed an equity policy. And that lives throughout throughout SPS. And so we go back to that, and we don't alter from that. We don't change that. It can't be like a definition of convenience. If the data says it and the right thing to do for students, particularly the students who have been marginalized, is the right thing to do, then you do the right thing. And that's, yeah. I think I tend to be somebody that you won't find me saying one thing to one audience and one thing to another. The things that are really important and value to me, I say consistently.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. We have two members who are unable to join us in person today, Brandon Cardet Hernandez and our student representative, Zyra Mercer. Both have submitted questions, which I will read on their behalf. So this is from Mr. Cardet Hernandez. Currently, we are operating a two-tier special education system lacking the diverse portfolio of programming options that students with disabilities need and deserve. Our individualized education plans struggle to truly individualize programming because of our vast service delivery deficits. Can you give hard evidence around your work in special education reform and disability justice? How have you innovated around these urgent issues in the past? How have you transformed outcomes for students with disabilities and ELL students with disabilities? And what data would you point to when describing your policy work, and more importantly, the outcomes for kids and families?
Sure. So thank you. I appreciate that. So I think, I'll draw on Somerville as an example. So when I came into Somerville, partnered very strongly with the special education director to really look at the data and what was happening. We saw disparities. We saw lots of disparities. We saw disparities by race. We saw disparities by outcome for special education students. DESE was monitoring us for overrepresentation by race in our substantially separate. We saw, dragging indicators around dropout, graduation rate for our special education students. We had a real oversubscription in out-of-district placements for our special education students. And yet our parents were saying, we want our students in the Somerville Public Schools. We want them to be able to take advantage of all of the programming, the after-school programming, the sports. And so we did a lot of redesign. So in the case of the substantially separate, our substantially separate numbers, as we have done training, have decreased significantly, so that most are least restrictive. Most students are able to access part of their day in general education. And again, that's inclusion, that's training of teachers, that's scheduling, it's lots of things. That also includes specialists. So we've had an eye to hire specialists like adaptive phys ed, or art therapy, or music therapy. I mean, the idea is to give students with disabilities access during the day. I think one of the more significant places that we've had to build out is around our autism programming. We've seen huge numbers of students moving into the district with autism. And we have had to open numerous classrooms to support, but we did it in a way that allowed students who traditionally could only have been served outside of Somerville in a separate setting instead be able to be served in Somerville and as part of the public school system. So I think, when I came in, with my special ed director, we were like 120, 130 students out of district, which for a district our size was really large. I think we're at about 70 now, somewhere around there. And that's just deliberate programming. That's building programming that didn't exist for ASD, social emotional. Our social emotional overrepresentation of students of color was significant. And that social emotional program has grown smaller and smaller year after year because the behaviors that were being identified as special education weren't in fact special education. They needed to be, they needed to have regulation in other ways, but that was quite capable of happening in the mainstream. Many of the other outcomes for special education in terms of achievement have increased in terms of our duly identified students, and that is the group that needs the most support. Just nationally, the data for our duly identified lags behind the other, both special education and ELL independent. Part of that, I think, in the IEP process is really having an awareness with the family that, the student is the student. Everything comes together in the student. It's not like the student ELL and the student special education. It's the student. And and I think how IEPs are written in how meetings happen that include language attainment need to be done in a very cohesive way for the family. And they need to be done with interpreters who can actually make sense of a lot of the language, because the language is very jargony, in special education and also in ELL. So I think, there's processes that we tried to do. We hired in a number of interpreters and translators to rework the documentation, to rework how meetings would be held so that families could be more partners with us in that work. So it's been in all of these ways that, we're no longer being monitored. Our outcome data for our special education students is much stronger. CPAC is, a partner. Our special education director meets with CPAC often. There's public presentations on special education in progress multiple times during school committee each year. Same thing with our English language learner programming. I think the visibility, the transparency is incredibly important to the community. I think when we don't make the progress that we're looking for, we need to own that and acknowledge it, and then let the community know what else we're willing to do about it. So I think, but that happens here, right? That happens in meetings that we take into the community and work with parents on. That happens in responsiveness in the departments to contacting back parents who have concerns. It's that level of communication and trust that we have to build back.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Mercer asked the following question. What are your thoughts about students playing a key role in their education, and how often would you like to meet with student leaders?
Like every day. So I, yeah, so when I was in the network soup, BSAC was a key component of what we did. We met, BSAC was stationed right in the area where my office was, and students were always in there. We used BSAC as a way to be able to get messaging out to students and to solicit input from students in a very active way. I think it's, I think sometimes we have a tendency to say we want to hear student voice, but we want to hear it on adult terms. So as long as it's done this way, it's fine, you gave voice. Students need to see that what they say makes a difference, that the energy they put into it. So I had two of our youth, sort of like our own BSAC, but two youth workers bring our students together, and we actually gave them credit for coming together and learning about some of the issues that were happening in the community and in the schools. And then they made very specific, we actually partnered with Harvard on it, they made very specific suggestions of things that needed to change. And we heard those. The principal was there, school committee went, everybody listened. And then we made commitments. So we can't do all of them, because there were a lot. And school lunch was one of them, because it always is. But we said we will at least, we can do these 4 or 5 things that we can commit to do. And it's important to follow through with that and to actually do it. And I think BSAC is such a strong group that would be easy to begin to meet with. I would love to to be able to see that meeting happen, on a monthly basis, to understand from the students what they're thinking and what's important to them.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. O'Neill will ask the next question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Superintendent Skipper, welcome. I want to call you Superintendent because that is your title in Somerville. And I know when President Obama visited you at Tech Boston to learn about the great work you were doing there, he nicknamed you Skip. But I have such respect for the role of superintendent and anyone who is willing to be a superintendent in any city because it's a hard job. And so if it's okay with you, I will address you as superintendent.
100%.
And first of all, thank you. Thank you for your willingness to be here. Your opening statement meant a lot to me, where you talked about the importance of Boston to you and the work you were doing in Somerville, but you've always felt called here too. And so your willingness to be here with us, to have this conversation, I am deeply appreciative. So the beauty of a school committee is we all bring different things to the table, right? We work collaboratively as a board, and you're seeing from our questions areas of interest for each of us. So I know some of my colleagues have deeper expertise in areas than I have. So I'll try to go to my strength or an area that I focus in on, as much as I'm interested in the questions being raised and wanted to ask a number of them myself. So let's talk about financial resources. Boston Public Schools, relative to a number of other cities in the Commonwealth, and certainly compared to a number of other large urban districts across the country, are in admirable condition when it comes to financial resources. Quite frankly, thanks to Dr. Casilius and her work with 3 mayoral administrations, from Mayor Walsh and Mayor Janey to now Mayor Wu, the city has honored a commitment of an additional $100 million added to our base budget over 3 years. You add that to the already substantial city resources and the state resources and the regular federal resources, we're actually in good shape, right? But, and much work has been done over the past several years to correct for inequities in spending, from weighted student funding, where the funding is now based on the students, to soft landings for schools facing changes in enrollment, to additional support for our most challenged schools. And now we have an unprecedented level of federal support, albeit for a very specific and too short period of time, which creates opportunities and challenges. Yet even with these resources, we're consistently in a situation of having to make difficult financial choices. So, 3-part question. First, would you please explain to us your approach to fiscal management, how you make financial decisions, and how you center equity in your decision-making on fiscal matters? Second, as a way of being specific, could you please also share with us how you have approached spending the additional short-term federal funding, the ESSA funding, how you use it appropriately to get support for students, but also protect against creating a fiscal cliff that would require very difficult decisions 2 years out. And lastly, I welcome any thoughts you have. So first is your fiscal philosophy, so to speak. Second is specific about ESSA. And then third is I'd welcome any thoughts you've had or experience you've had in generating additional funding for a district beyond federal, state, and city, and how you have creatively put that to work.
Sure. So thank you. Thank you for that. So I think a budget to me is a value statement. It's where your values are in the district. So if equity is one of your values, then it needs to translate that the dollars are flowing to the students that most need those dollars. And that should be your check throughout. If you support English language learner education, then that should be evident in the budget and in the investment. Same with special education. If parent engagement is important, then that should be evident in the budget. So in other words, there shouldn't be anything that you feel is a strong value and you state it that you are not producing revenue and resources for. In the case of, it is unprecedented given that in my 20 years in BPS, I actually never remember a level budget but 1 year. So it's really wonderful to know that through the work of the superintendents in the committee that you're now at a point where there are dollars that are flowing to be able to fund this work. I think in terms of the ESSER, we specifically in Somerville used ESSER in a couple different categories. One was social emotional. Almost, I think all of the ESSER dollars went directly to student service, directly to students. So there was a large component for social emotional. We added social workers, adjustment counselors, bilingual adjustment counselors, counselor educators, deans of students, etc., to get to a ratio that we committed contractually to 1 to, I believe, 125. So 1 student to 125 of those particular types of positions. We also invested, besides the social, and that also included embedded counseling because we don't want wait lists for students for counseling. So that was also leveraging our partners and community partners to make sure that students and families that needed support could get it, and they didn't have to go onto wait lists to be able to do that. Second was academic and intervention. And so really understanding what students needed intervention, that meant adding reading specialists, bilingual literacy specialists, adding in math interventionists, really trying to address and see from the student side the skills that were missing and then add appropriate intervention resources for. Special education compensatory, which we wanted to make sure of. Because of our significant newcomer population increase, we also invested heavily in new ELL programming. Some of the changes I alluded to earlier are funded through ESSER to be able to directly support. So in the case of, say, our SLIFE students who just had such trauma during the pandemic, it was very important to get dollars to them to make sure that there was social emotional supports and counseling for them and so forth. So really we've been using ESSER in those ways. We built out our tutoring program in a very strong way for our students. And we also have invested heavily in our out-of-school time. And, this is where I think you can actually accelerate learning in a lot of ways. Students like to learn differently in the out-of-school time, not the same, just extended. They want to have different experiences. So we've sought out through RFPs partners that we believe can deliver that. Some of those partners, we've brought in previously, like Breakthrough and Unroot and BAM and WOW and, partners that have kind of been with us and we've been able to increase them using ESSER. But then there were other partners that we sought out to be able to expand our summer programming. So, we have about a little over 1/3 of the students participate in some kind of summer programming. And that programming can have social, emotional, academic, physical component to it. But the idea is whole child. Music, arts, things like that. So bottom line is the ESSER dollars flow to the kids. They flow to the students and direct services. And like everywhere else, social, emotional was a key component. our English language learners, our special education, and closing gaps. And then the final question was.
The final question was about your experiences in additional
fundraising.
funding beyond federal, city, and state.
That's right. So,
And
so
some
you know,
programs that you particularly want to.
yeah. So I mean, I think like this is the deep partnerships, right? Like this is my experience is deep sustained partnerships lead to success. So really looking at coalition building here. This is Boston. We have a lot of partners, but how do we make sure that the partners are getting to the schools and the students that need them? So really looking and kind of auditing and seeing what's happening in schools, what their partnerships look like, what students are being impacted by those partnerships. Where there's holes, we galvanize partners. And partners contribute in a lot of ways. It's not just fiscal. It's time, it's mentorship, it's opportunities, it's internships, it's externships for teachers. There's lots of ways that partners can contribute besides just signing a check. So we'd be my goal would be to look at that and to really understand in our schools how the partners are impacting, where they're not able to impact right now, and then really try to make sure that that we're redirecting some of the new partners toward the schools that most need it, with the students that most need it.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Sure.
Thank you. The last question in this round is from me. According to the BPS policy to eliminate opportunity and achievement gaps approved by the Boston School Committee in 2016, the Opportunity Gaps Office is responsible for shepherding district-wide implementation of the policy. How would you position the work with the OG office for maximum impact in deepening anti-racist consciousness and closing opportunity and achievement gaps for our most marginalized student populations, including students of color, English language learners, students with disabilities, and students from low socioeconomic backgrounds? What experience and demonstrated success have you had in working with a district-level office focused on closing gaps?
Sure. Thank you. Appreciate that. So I'll go back to the high school network work. It's imperative that one office isn't doing all of that work. It has to leverage the resources that are in the rest of the district, because often it may be academic. It may be the way IEPs are being written. It may be the way English language learner education is being done or implemented that's causing the gaps. So there really has to be a team that's focused on that, that's cross-sector, right? It has to go across the other departments. So I think I would come in and I would want to see what our progress has been, where our progress has been. So are there some good examples or shining examples? And then be able to sort of go from there to say, how do we build this cross-sector team so that when we're talking about it, there's actionable items to actually create the change. In the high school network, a good example was graduation rate. I'll take that. So once we lowered the dropout and we had students in the pipeline to graduate, that wasn't the solution. That gave us more kids and more students, but the students weren't ready to graduate, right? They sometimes had gaps. So we had to work very strategically across departments. And this was ELL, this was special education at the time, this was our partnership division that brought in specific partners to look at like 13th year programming, to look at articulation with some of the local colleges so students could start. It was Success Boston. I mean, we really had to, for that one issue, bring to the forefront multiple stakeholders that were in the BPS and outside of the BPS around that one issue. And so I think that's how I would approach it, is that I'd want to know, what does the data currently say, who's at the table, and then more importantly, who's missing from the conversation to actually get the work done.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So that concludes our first round, so take a deep breath, grab a sip of water, exhale, and we'll go around again for round two. So, going back to Dr. Alkins for his next question.
Now, or are we taking? All right. All right.
You want to stand up and? Do you need a moment?
No, I was just stretching a little bit. Okay. Sure. ask this question and then if there's time, like sort of come back to it. So you've talked a good deal about the importance of partnerships specifically, and I can say this, so as we prepare our students specifically for the next generation of academic and career paths, access to quality, equitable STEM education and STEM education opportunities are crucial to that success. And currently, we do have programs that leverage partnerships with biotech companies, maker spaces, et cetera, but only a few schools seem to possess these, which creates an unequal educational experience. How do you plan to expand BPS partnerships for STEM education opportunities with nonprofits, corporate bodies, and improve access to those STEM education career paths, focusing on those schools that and demographics that are often most marginalized?
Thank you for that. So, so I think that there are some partners who work in this area, and some foundations that work in this area. So the example I'll give is we had a deep partnership with this too was an issue in Somerville, so we decided how can we tackle it, and it was also a joint venture with Cambridge because the foundation supported both. So it was Biogen, and so we entered a partnership in the STAR initiative 4 years ago that has translated to millions of dollars of investment, specifically with the goal of exposure for STEM to students, and specifically for students who are traditionally marginalized from STEP opportunities. So what did that look like? So that looked like building on a menu of partners like Citizen Schools, like Breakthrough, like En route, who reaches our ELL learners, to be able to help them be able to access STEM opportunities. Each of those programs has built in with it kind of a mission of STEM, but then also has a mission of higher education, of going on and continued learning. And so there was a data analyst that was provided. We looked at the students. We were looking at who was traditionally accessing the programming, how we could do deeper recruitment for the students that either didn't know about it or might not have seen themselves in it. And that also included in each of these partnerships looking for mentors, looking for people that could outreach, to families, to students. And through that process, through that work, our out of school time kind of transformed students' ability to look at STEM. So our data said more of our students, traditionally marginalized students, Black and brown students, were interested in STEM careers. They were doing better in their math classes. They were doing better in their science classes. They were accessing higher levels of math and science classes because we were able to take a problem, find a resource or partner like Biogen, work in partnership with another district, and be able to put some of the structures in place to give those students opportunities, both academic and I would say experiential, in the area of STEM. And that's still going, right? That's still going on now. So I think, district-wide here, we really need to sort of look at how we're doing specialists. We should look at what is the current way that students, much like they get exposure to art and to music, what is the way that they get exposure to STEM? Are there ways in our media centers that we're able to do some programming there so that all students would have an opportunity, but particularly students who might never, or think of themselves in a STEM career can see it. Workforce development-wise, we can definitely partner, as we have in the past, specifically around STEM career, and bring that in. I mean, I think there's just lots of ways that we can do it at a larger scale here. Tech Boston was sort of born on this, right? Like the idea of Tech Boston was that our students were really capable to do exceptionally well in technology and STEM careers. And when we began it, people thought students can't do it. And that was a mistake on their part, because by bringing in industry, by giving them the ability to do internships, by having our project base be centered around STEM, we were able, and actually giving them tools like a laptop to be able to use and familiarize with, that transformed a lot of the students' lives because they saw themselves capable of doing it, and they did do it. We had some of the first kids in the country to pass industry tests in technology that even adults weren't passing back then. And that's only grown, right, into graphic arts and into, into lab sciences and life sciences and math. And so there's definitely ways to bring partnership and resource together to be able to give a broader exposure to STEM.
How much time do I have left? What's my time at?
Time up. Make it. Does he have any more time left?
Oh, yes.
Oh, just a little bit.
You wanted to
Right.
continue.
So, okay, thank you.
Can't see you.
No, so sort of along those lines, I mean, there's been a lot of, there's been programming, there's been movement in the district, and so the one thing that I think that families will tell you is that over the past few years, to say the least, we've had a lot of turnover, and the one thing that it creates is a feeling of instability. Mm-hmm. It creates a feeling that we're always sort of resetting the plan, and there's always there's always a sense that we're overriding what we've already done because we're always having to restart the conversation on a lot of different things. So some of that is necessary, but how do we mitigate that? And what would be your strategy to mitigate that? And so how do you plan to evaluate and enforce accountability, particularly within our central office, and ensure that we are not spinning our wheels trying to reinvent the wheel?
Thank you. So, I mean, I know I've seen the strategic plan. I know there's a strategic plan that's in place. I think we need to, go back to that. We need to look at the structure of Central. Our resources in facing should be outward. It should be toward the schools. It should be toward the students. I think we might need to make some directional change there. I think, need to sort of look at, and again, not being here, that's kind of hard to answer in some ways, but I would be evaluating and sort of looking at people in positions, hearing from them as to their experience. What are they able to do? What are they not able to do? Is frustration, I had a question earlier about morale, and I think, my experience with morale is when people are clear on the what, the why, and the how, and they're given the right supports and resources, it works magic, and they get motivated because they can accomplish. And so I think looking at deeper communication system in how we're communicating, how the teams are working together, not across each other, looking at how they're connected to the schools and to the school superintendents, those would all be areas that I would look at that I think could potentially, with our team, that could potentially stabilize some of that kind of moving and changing and things like that. I mean, the other thing to acknowledge, and I think this is across all districts, we just went through a pandemic. And, that was difficult. It was something education's not been through. And whether you're in a big district or a small district, it really has taken its toll on our educators, on our families, on our children. So I do think that now that we've had a year of some stability, right, some regulation, some getting back in, we can kind of take that as a foundation and start to grow it. And it may mean we need to do a few things well instead of a lot of things not well or partial, to be able to get us to the point that we can actually build off priorities and create some momentum in directions of success for students. But again, without having the opportunity to talk to people and to look at things, but that would be kind of my initial.
Okay.
Ms. LaFera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for speaking. Thank you for the questions around the partnerships and STEM opportunities. I'm grateful for my colleagues here because the questions that I wanted to ask have been limited, but you all are asking them, so thank you. And thank you for engaging in this conversation with us. You just mentioned the impacts of COVID, and I think about the extremes, right? The little ones who are trying to still understand what school is, and then our older ones who went from middle school to almost done with high school. And so, in Boston Public Schools, we have alternative schools that are offering educational environments for some of our most vulnerable students. And I imagine that we will see an uptick of more students engaging in these opportunities. And so would love to hear from you what work you've done with this particular population, what outcomes you've seen as impacts with these types of supports, and what data you can point to highlight systemic improvement for overage and undercredited students. What do you think is needed in order to strengthen our current program here at Boston Public Schools?
Sure, thank you. So I think educational options are critical, and having a broad menu of educational options, because we have so many different students. This is an area where you could work strongly in partnership to create what doesn't yet exist. I think, part of the problem at the high school level is that students left in the 9th grade, and they may have been off track, and they came back in the 11th grade very off track. In fact, dropping out, disengaged. And so for us to think they're just going to plug back in and pick it up it's not going to happen. So we need to have really deliberate programming, particularly for those that have less time, right? Those that are toward the end. I also think we need to have a strong push on our engagement center. I think, re-engagement was always a really critical piece to our dropout and graduation rates. Being able to engage students in that first year window when they drop out, because after that, you really lose them. They get working, they move, you can't get in touch with them. So I'd like to see re-engagement picked back up again in that way. And again, I haven't been in touch with any folks, so I'm not, there's no judgment there. That would be an area that would be of interest to me. On the ed option side, I think there's a couple of things. I think we need to engage workforce. I think we need to look at 13th year. This was something that I had been really excited to try to get going right before I left this high school soup, but our network had identified that there's students in schools that are seniors who are not really ready to leave. They're still relying heavily on the supports that are in the schools, and those could be social emotional, they could be academic, and then they leave, they go to, say, a community college, and those resources aren't there, and then they just drop, and they drop out. So a 13th year would actually allow them, much like Success Boston with a college coach, would allow support at the school, and there's perhaps some classes that they actually take at school, and then allow them to be able to go on to the college and have that college coaching. And in that way, really lift them in their first year, in that 13th year, so that by the time that they're going into that next year, they're just stronger, they're more ready. Those are the students I worry a lot about, because they leave you at graduation, and they, over the summer, change their plan. And they don't graduate, and then they never get their credits over the summer. So I think we could be creative and start programming such as that. I also think it's not relegated to just the high schools. I think for the middle schoolers, the same thing happened. They left us in 6th grade, they came back in 8th grade, and they were not the same young people. They were 8th graders. And in that time, they missed a lot of foundational skill, but a lot of also developmental work. And so I think that can, we can definitely look at push-in programming for that with partners. We can look at site-based that they could go to, with a lot of our local sites. We could add resources into those. That's, ESSER dollars could be used for things like that to be able to address that level of need. But this is actually one of my top concerns right now, because it's at such a magnitude everywhere that unless we're really responsive about this, we're losing a generation of students.
Do I have time for just a quick follow-up?
Yes.
Can you speak to, so clearly you've been outside of Boston for some time, and you can't speak to the specifics of our system, but can you talk about what you've been doing in Somerville to address these very challenges that we were just discussing?
Yeah, certainly. So, we've done a big push. We have, at each of our grade levels, we have organizational unit that brings together academic, counseling, administration to address 9th grade experience, 10th grade experience, 11th grade. And so really have drilled down on that, as I think high schools would, like a singular high school would, to be able to identify who are the kids that are most off track, and then put appropriate support in place. So that could be, connection with partners. That could be embedded counseling. That could be a tier 2 or 3 solution where they might, want or need to go to an alternative setting for a period of time, or an ed option setting for a period of time. We have a distance program as well that is half in person and distance. And some students use that to gain recovery, and then they come back, and they graduate traditionally. So but the main thing is looking at the students and the data, because they tell us, right? They tell us both, in the classes they attend or don't attend. They tell us in the school that they come to or don't come to. They just tell us through a lot of pieces of data where they are. So we very much do that. We do it through a strong student support mechanism. That would be something I would want to see here, strong student supports in each of the schools. That's where your social workers are attached, your nurses are attached, your building administrators attached, and everyone's talking about the students. And they're talking about what we've tried, what has worked, what hasn't worked. They're engaging families. This is the kind of structures, right? Student support teams, what we call multi-tiered student interventions, our MTSS teams, and then, at the school level, our ILTs. Those are just structures that have to work in schools for the school to be able to move and support the students. So I'd be looking at those with the team to say, what schools need help. There's really effective rubrics for Model 1s that we use in training and preparation. We do observation and then give feedback for how the team is run, because that's also insightful for them. And in that way, we're able to really, our dropout did not really go up significantly, nor did our graduation rate go down significantly, because we were able to really do that outreach. It sounds crazy in Boston to think you can do that for every kid, but I have to say that when we did the network, the high school network work, we did it at the student level. When I look at data, I look at student level data. I audit. I look and I pick 10 random students, and or 10 random IEP students, and I will sit myself and look at what has been done, because it tells me an awful lot about what systems are missing. And that's my basis for conversation and how to fix the system. Students tell us everything we need, both in what they do and what they say and in their data. So I very similarly, that's what we did, with, back then, the 19,000 kids, 19,000 students, but we were doing it with a network. So everybody was on the same page about what they had to do with what data and what the next step was. And they were working collaboratively with the school leaders, because the school leaders are key in this. So,
Thank you.
Ms. Polanco Garcia.
Thank you. En este sistema educativo, los maestros juegan un papel muy importante.
In this system, teachers play a very important role.
Y sabemos que hay muchos maestros que se están yendo del distrito educativo de Boston.
And we know that many teachers are leaving the district in Boston.
Me gustaría saber cómo ha abordado usted el reclutamiento, la concesión de licencia y la retención de maestros y personal que sea competente para enseñar en por lo menos 2 idiomas.
How have you approached the recruitment, licensing, and retention of faculty and staff who are competent to teach in at least 2 languages?
¿Cuál ha sido alguno de sus éxitos y qué reto superó?
What have been some of your successes? What challenges did you overcome?
Okay. So, sorry, I was used to the multiple parts. In Somerville, this has been one of our focus, one of our foci, to be able to ensure that our students are being taught by staff that represent them linguistically and racially. I think when we talk about hiring teachers, we specifically in Somerville have made in job descriptions, a certain portion of the job descriptions, bilingual required. We are working to create a pipeline for our educators, which are interestingly our paras. Our paraprofessionals, actually, most of them are multilingual. And so we're providing opportunity for them to become teachers, for them to become for within the community. We actually just worked with Padres Latinos on recruiting parents who wanted to work as paraprofessionals. We brought them in, we're training them this summer. They're getting an internship, and then they will become paraprofessionals, all of whom speak another language. And so we're trying to build a pipeline that starts with even parents in the community and then goes to paraprofessionals that can then go to teachers. I think the challenge for teachers in general, or the challenge around teachers, we put a heavy emphasis on recruitment and retention and hiring, but we miss the steps of development and advancement. And I say that because at no time more than now, if you're a teacher that's only been teaching 1, 2, or 3 years, you had very little preparation for what you're experiencing. You didn't get the advantage of having students in front of you for the first couple of years. And you had to learn to teach on a Zoom, which isn't real teaching. It's not the same. And now the students are coming back and they are dysregulated and they're having some behaviors that the teachers have never even managed a normal class for. And it's a huge stressor. It's a huge disconnect for teachers. I mean, I've talked to teachers who are going to be, who are first, second year teaching, like, I don't know if I can do it. So the development is critical, right? We need to get to teachers the tools that they feel are going to help them in the classroom. So really the de-escalation pieces, how to identify trauma and what that looks like, how that plays out, parent engagement, how to be able to have conversations with parents. These are how to mediate. These are all skills that are tier 1 that before you might have only needed in certain situations, and now you need every day. So we need to do a good job with doing that level of preparation and professional development. And then comes advancement. When I first started as a teacher, I thought I'm going to be a teacher the rest of my career. And most people do. But then what happens is you start to teach and you get involved and you're a teacher leader, you're doing something different, you have a coach that's impactful and you're like, I want to be a coach, or you have a building school leader that's impactful and you say, hey, I want to be a school leader. Like that's what happened for me. And so we need to provide real advancement opportunities for our teachers so they don't feel they need to leave us. They don't feel like they need to go someplace different. They can have that here in the Boston Public Schools. So development and advancement would really be the 2 areas that I would want to put some real emphasis on. And then the pipeline issue of recruitment is super important, particularly to have a multilingual staff, particularly to have a diverse and talented, racially diverse, talented staff. So I think that whole human capital area is an area I've spent a lot of time up in Somerville with my team on, and it would be one of the key areas that we would be spending here because we need to have stable staff.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tron?
Okay. I'm back again. Sorry for taking a little time out. Actually, my second question submitted to the panel was implicitly or explicitly answered through your articulation so far. So I have a different question.
Okay.
I know that you were not prepared for it, but it's a simple question anyway.
Excuse me, Mr. Tran, right
Just
into the
in the
microphone.
same line with.
Right into the microphone, please.
I keep forgetting this. In the same line with Dr. Alkin's question regarding operational capacity that you bring with you to the position. My question is, what are the top 3 deeds or tasks or projects that you will tackle in the first 3 months of if you are hired as our superintendent? What are the top 3?
Thank you. So the first is building a team, right? This isn't about a person. It can't be. It's about a team. And so it's building, a diverse, talented, culturally proficient, multilingual team that can do the work here with me in Boston Public Schools. So it's going to be a lot of networking, a lot of recruiting, and that will hold true of my colleagues as well. It'll be meeting with people and talking with people about their experiences, what they feel are their strengths, what they feel are mismatch, what they feel are holes on the team. And so it'll be a lot of that team building in order to get a team in place for next year, for this coming year, to carry the work out. I think secondly, based on everything I've heard in the panels and read in the surveys, is it's trust and transparency with the community. I heard many parents talk about feeling that they can't trust what happens, and that they want, even if it's not the right answer, they just want the truth. They want transparency. And so I think we would have a lot of work to do of sharing data, finding ways to share the data that makes sense for parents, that's not our educational ways of doing it, and being able to show our progress toward the things that we say are important and that they say are important. And so I think that's, again, looking at our family engagement, looking at communications, in our teams, our school-based teams, for how our schools can be the centers for some of that conversation to happen, and how can Central be some of that conversation to happen. But we have to have the trust of our parents. That's a non-negotiable. I think the third is systems and structures, right? I need to figure out what's working and what's not working, and what's broken and in the system. If students are experiencing something and we think this is working, then clearly something's broken. So looking at systems and structures in the academic side, in the social emotional side, clearly in the special education side. I mean, I didn't hear a difference of that between what sort of has come out in reports and then what people have said. I think we've had 3 or 4 questions on special education here, right? So special ed is clearly English language learner education is another, and really looking at that. Early education, I'm actually hearing really kind of good things about, but obviously there's a need to expand. There's a need to not only expand, but look at the equity of where the seats are. Are they reaching the community that has the need, and are they day-long seats? Are they just partial, or are they actual day-long? And can we partner with partners so that we give relief for parents all day, as opposed to just 1 o'clock, which is impossible for parents to go back and forth and pick up. So I think it's systems and structures in the key areas of the org, building the team and teams, and the trust and transparency with the community. Those right now would be my 3, having gone through this process today, having read everything that I've read and looked at the data. Those would be my 3.
Just a follow-up on the second priority, trust and transparency. I understand that you're thinking of sharing data and all that to the public. Would you be open to a series of meeting with the public?
Sure.
Yeah.
I do it now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important. It's when you're the superintendent, you're a part of the community. I think, school committee meetings can be really powerful as a mechanism for sharing information, but then I think we have to find other ways to let the public be able to see the information that we're doing and the work that we're doing and the progress we're making. And if we're not making progress in an area, I think we have to identify we're not making progress, and we need to suggest why that is, and then we need to suggest what our alternative strategies are. Because it's just not okay not to make progress. You're welcome.
I'll read the next question on behalf of Mr. Cardet Hernandez. Bullying, and to put it more bluntly, sexual, verbal, and physical harassment have been plaguing our system. Students with disabilities and LGBTQ+ students, real or perceived, are experiencing this harassment and harm in record numbers. Our system at times is struggling to report, respond, and cultivate safety for some of our most vulnerable kids. What is your strategy for strengthening school culture, building and rebuilding trust with families, and acting faster? Equally, there are school-level issues, but there are valid concerns about central oversight. In your response, can you talk about the work on the school level, but connected to the responsibility, infrastructure needs, and accountability at the top.
Sure. Thank you. So I think post-pandemic, I think students have come back, and even for staff, many of the things they were trained on before have kind of disappeared because the virtual world was just very different. I think we have to hit a reset in a lot of these areas and do some real retraining. I think the safety protocols, which extend to bullying, which extend to school climate, which extend to fighting, which extend to weapons, all those things, that we really need to double down on the protocols, and we need to do training so that school-based staff know what they need to do, school leaders know what they need to do, and there's clear lines of communication to central. When something happens, who does it get reported to, who follows up on it, and then what happens for the parent? I think, the problem resolution, the Department of Ed problem resolution, that should be the outlier, right? What should really happen is that follow-up and that system should happen internally. The ones that get to problem resolution shouldn't be the majority, right? It should be, the majority should be able to be handled at the school level with support from central. And I think, I even saw this in Somerville, it takes retraining on all the key areas, the 51As and mandating reporting, bullying protocols and what happens, the difference between bullying and peer conflict, how you deal with that. I'd love to see us develop a mediation program. It's been one of the saving things up there. We've had a long-term mediation program, and I can't tell you how many times that has allowed us to negotiate between peers a conflict that has avoided a physical fight or a verbal assault or something of a student. So I think that there's other things that we can add into that. Strong mentoring programs I think would also be good for the students right now as an outlet. And volunteer programs as a way to get adult attention to the students. But, in this particular area, we have to hit a reset. I think all districts do. They have to hit a reset for next year. They have to start with deep training, make sure that the classroom teacher knows what to do in what situation, feels empowered, has clear communication, and when there's an incident, the school principal's aware of what he or she needs to do, and that translates down to central, and central knows how they need to respond. And the more serious ones get trickled up. They get trickled up. I mean, I don't like getting blindsided as a superintendent. So I want to know a situation when I can still do something about it. So I'm very active with my team of finding out, if there's a serious situation. I debrief, even as school district 5,000 kids, I debrief every day with my student support director for the district to find out what's happened. Because I want to know. Because it tells me what's missing. It tells me what system's missing or what resource is missing for a student.
Great. Thank you. I'll read the next question on behalf of Ms. Mercer. How will you support student leadership, or to be more specific, the BSAC, and what steps would you take after students have protested or are protesting?
Protesting. So this is every superintendent. So I'll answer the first part. So in terms of student leadership, I would love to develop and foster student leadership where students can actually get credit and learn what it means to be a leader and have responsibilities. So I'd love to work with some of our schools on how we can do that. I think sometimes we always ask students to do things for free, and what it does is it takes away the opportunity for students who can't do it for free, and so you want to be able to reach all kids. The way that we have handled protest, and some of this was in Boston as well prior for me when I was the high school network. I think students, it's always about safety for students, right? And it's always about us keeping student safety, keeping students safe in a walkout. What we've asked students to do is, if there's a cause that you're walking out for, and again, this isn't like every day, this is a cause that you deeply care about, that you've done the research on it, that if you have other students that you're working with, that they are aware and can articulate the issue, that if it means that it's for a short duration, and our preference is like a walk out, walk in. So it might be for 10 minutes or 8 minutes or whatever symbolically it is, and then students come back in. If it means leaving campus, then there's a process in which parents have to do release so that we can keep students safe. And really putting work on the student leaders who are organizing it. I think in that way they learn from a civil disobedience side that there is a way to do it that keeps students safe. And then we do other things. We let people know, like we would, obviously like our safety folks, we would let them know, because if kids are walking, you want to make sure they're safe, no cars, things like that. So we lay that kind of protocol out to them. And frankly, students have been really responsive to it. We've had two walkouts this year. And in both cases, they were walkouts, walk-ins, and then there was a small group of students who were more intimately involved in the issue, and they left campus, but they did it with parent permission. And so we were really able to kind of, and I will also say that they all started because of a national call, right? So that's the power of social media and organizing. Mm-hmm. It started with a national call, and then our students found out about it from the national call, and then there was a plan to meet someplace else. So, but they did it, really, and we commended them for it afterwards, so it wasn't punitive. We didn't take anything away. They weren't suspended. But again, there has to be a short duration. It has to be, planned enough that it's not incredibly disruptive to the rest of the school. That's the thing, because not everybody's going to share that cause. So that's how I've handled it in the past. I think a lot of this depends on the context of what it is, how many people are involved in it. There's lots of those types of things.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. O'Neill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as Ms. LaPera said, the beauty of us working together is we often cross over areas of interest, right? So just as Dr. Elkins asked about STEM, and you have an interest in that, you and I share an interest in alternative education and high school persistency. So I just want to clarify a point that you made, because I do have deep interest in our alternative education system. I believe we need a robust set of offerings for our students, particularly as we work through the re-engagement center, which has been a national model, and thank you for calling that out. And work that you did in your years leading the high school networks, right? So, but you used the words persistent, early on you used the words about persistency beyond high school. And then you talked about the potential 13th year. And to me, that's important, because to me, philosophically, we have responsibility for our students not to get them to 12th grade or to a high school diploma, but set them up to succeed in either college or career, whichever path they choose. And whether it's, you reference Success Boston and College Coach to help students who go to college, I personally think we need more work around, we've been making progress, but we need more work around getting some students credit toward associate degrees or certifications in jobs that make sense. And you referenced that a little bit in Tech Boston. Mm-hmm. But help me philosophically, is it, and I just want to confirm, it's your belief we have the responsibility for students past BPS?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I mean, what we give our students while they're here is what they have for life, right? Like that's the launching pad. If they're not prepared for that, that's on us. So if they don't have the concrete skills to succeed in higher ed, or they don't have the concrete skills to succeed in workforce, we have to go back and look at ourselves and say, what did we miss? Like, what's not working for the students? College persistence is something that's been when we say college persistence, the clearinghouse data isn't perfect, so it's hard to get an exact figure, but you can get close enough. But, college persistence before Success Boston was 35%, meaning that the vast majority of BPS students that were leaving were not finishing. They weren't getting, an associate's or a bachelor's or a certification or a technical degree. That's up in the high 50s now, right? Like Success Boston has changed that landscape, but not for all kids yet, right? And so that then becomes, well, what about the other 40%? What are the options? And that's where I think, the creative partnerships come in, of being able, like the 13th year and so forth, as solutions for the students who might be leaving us, but they still drop. They still can't finish. And it can be for a variety of reasons. The financial aid and the FAFSA is a world unto its own. You hear students talk about this. So, having strong partnerships with a U Aspire to be able to continue to work with the graduates after they leave, having resource within our schools that they have relationship with, so that they can continue to work, and be able to, get their paperwork completed, buying their books. Like, there's all kinds of intricacies to it in addition to academic support. So I think the 13th year addresses some group of students, but we would need to really slice and look at the 40% that aren't, or the 45% that aren't persisting, what's happening for them, right? And this is where, in the past, we've been able to do some pretty good exit survey data of the kids to find out, what they're thinking, where they're going, what is barriers, and then outreach data afterwards. You Aspire, that we work with, they work here, we've been able to get data for kids 2-3 years out. And that's all gets mapped back onto our system,
So let's also talk about Madison Park, right? Because opportunity to create wonderful job opportunities for our students in leading sectors in the Boston's economy, and as Boston is changing. And yet we look at Worcester and we see Worcester has a fantastic model, and people aren't saying that about Boston.
Yeah.
What do we do about Madison Park? How do we make that a model that students are craving to get into because they know it's going to lead to great jobs in the sectors of the economy that are growing right in Boston?
Yes, so I think, a couple things. I think one is we have to introduce the idea of vocation and trade to students earlier. I think, having strong programming 6th, 7th, 8th grade where students can go to Madison Park and actually see it. They can meet kids, they can talk to students and hear what the students' work and shops are like. They can see work that's done. That then plants seeds for the students rather than when they get to the 8th grade making a decision whether to go or not, that's not informed. Same with parents. I think we can just do a good job like bringing parents in and seeing all the rich opportunities that a strong vocational CTE program has. A system can't be great without a great vocational CTE program. Like, you need it. It has to be a part of the menu. I think, we can look at like the workforce boards and look at the unions, talk about, the areas that are, that have been mapped out, and the areas that could potentially be mapped out as areas that are identified in workforce as developing and up and coming, and figure out what we can do with that either through Chapter 74 or through, Voc Ed, and really kind of build up a menu. I think it's also opening it up to the community. I mean, there's no reason why students that are graduating that don't have a definitive plan can't come back and actually get some support of skill building. And that could be in a trade, or that could be particular skills for certification. It could be a resource to our alumni, and it could also be a resource to the community. But it needs to be the thing, right? It needs to be the thing that everybody's directed toward and pointed toward. And the academics, just because it is college and career, there's very few right now careers that don't require continued learning. So I think we have to look at the academic piece and make sure it's as strong as possible, and that students have opportunities not only to be able to take the vocational or CTE classes, but they have the ability to take other things that interest them on the academic side, because those are the things that are going to enable the students to have options. And at day's end, our job is to create options for students.
Thank you. Madam Chair, do I have time to continue? I'll make it quick then. When I think about the inequities that were exposed, right, because of the pandemic, from food insecurity to homeless challenges or home challenges for our students, technology at home. I even think it's for families too. So the district's been doing some wonderful things, right? We were making great progress on getting healthy food for our students, unfortunately, till the pandemic hit, and hopefully we get back to that quite shortly. Wraparound services for families at like the Gardner Pilot at Burke, which is the hub school model that we hope to expand to other schools across the district. But thinking about this, these to me are the other ingredients separate from academic, right? The operational side. How do we get our students to school safely, get them fed, have a clean environment, have social emotional support, have wraparound services for their health, their sports, et cetera? How do you balance that as a superintendent with the academic side? Because unfortunately in this role, you have to be everything, right?
Sure. So I mean, I
balance
think
that.
to your point, right? The pandemic exacerbated everything, and I think the stat I heard today was BPS has done 7 million meals, which is like so applaudable, right? Like that's an incredible number. I mean, at day's end, with the way things have been, students aren't coming ready to learn if they're hungry, if they don't have a bed to sleep in, if they don't have clothes. There's some things we have to address before we get to the rest. But now that the pandemic is sort of shifting a little bit, and we've been back a year where everybody's sort of in a little bit more of a routine. I think this is where we have to start really looking at our academics, and this is where the gaps are going to come to play. I mean, I think this is where we have to really be able to look at the students that have gaps and then use intervention, use tutoring as a way to fill those gaps and then be able to accelerate the learning. So it's not that you can completely trade one for the other. We've been in a one-of-a-type crisis for the last 2.5 years. I think all districts did exactly what BPS did, which was if they were dealing, with students who had the legitimate issues of hunger and homelessness and social, emotional, and mental health and sickness, right? Like, I think BPS was not alone in that. We certainly in Somerville did that, right? We turned that attention. But I think now that we're coming back, there's an opportunity to really plan around how do we accelerate the learning for students. We've got a certain amount of regulation going. What's the additional social emotional that needs to be added in? What's the training that needs to be added in? What's the structures for the teams for good communication? What are all of those pieces that we then can start to really get back to, much more of the academic and ensuring rigor for all kids in our ELL programming, in our special education program, in our regular education program.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So I'll be asking the last question in this segment. Understanding the big picture and the monitoring and management of daily operations within a school district are essential skills for an effective superintendent. With this understanding, how do you design a cohesive, collaborative central office that delivers quality support and service to schools for equitable student outcomes?
Thank you for that. So this is really about building a team. It's building a culture in the team. It's setting a vision with the team. And it's regular communication, meetings, continuous improvement, checkpoints, looking at data, really all around the particular priorities that you're setting as a team. Listen, I think, in the pandemic, this was tough to do. I mean, this is your first in-person meeting. And, I think it's been difficult for leaders. This is, not unique to just Boston. I think, though, we're at a point now with coming back in person where this is an in-person business. we need to be in person, and the teams need to be meeting. And everybody needs to know their role in the team, and they need to be able to know what their steps are and what resources they need in order to carry out those steps. And we need to be very clear on what those goals are going to be for our students. And, I think this will be a building back over the course of the year of developing that team and developing what those protocols are going to be, what the expectations are around communication, and most importantly, what are the outcomes that we're looking for, and the data we're going to use to identify that we got them. So that's that would be the team building. I think it can be really exciting. There's nothing better than building a team that's all working in the same direction. It's awesome. It can be painful getting there, but it's awesome. And I think people are hungry. They want that. They want, this is, working for BPS. This is special, and people need to feel that. So that's what I would work toward.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I know that you said that was the last question, but I'm just asking. There's one question that wasn't asked, and I would really appreciate the time to ask just one final question. Thank you so much. One of the things that Mr. O'Neill mentioned around fiscal management was that we are in a position where we have been able to provide soft landings to various of our schools who are experiencing enrollment decline. This is a scary question to ask, and I think families are terrified of this conversation because it can often mean school closures. And so, but if we also think about the sustainability of soft landings, we also know that we have 120 plus schools, and if we were to do facility upgrades with enrollment decline, if we were to do a new school every single year, it would be over a century before our buildings would be upgraded. So I'm curious what strategy you would deploy in thinking about distributing resources, keeping in mind the trend around the decline in enrollment, also the fear of our families around displacement of communities and disruption with closures, and also our fiscal responsibility in investing in soft landings.
Great question. Thanks for saving it.
Sorry,
for
I'm
last.
just gonna throw it at you.
So, so I think, you know, the Green New Deal is something to be looked at and what that's going to mean in terms of the buildings. I think we have to decide what, you know, as a committee, we need to decide what is the trigger for closure. Is it just low enrollment, or is it a combination of low enrollment in a building that can't really be brought to a sustainable measure? You know, is it enrollment decline over the last 2 years, or is it enrollment decline over many years? I think, you know, is it looking at schools that are neighborhood-wise close enough to each other that we could do some impactful merger, some impactful consolidations, or sharing resources across buildings? That might be a way to be able to straddle it to see if enrollment trends hold. I think the enrollment is tough right now, right? You know, we've seen up, down. We're now seeing up again. And I think, you know, there'll be this settling that's going to happen. You know, do we want to make those decisions in this next year, or do we want to be able to kind of watch some of the data where it's very clear, make the decision, but then maybe withhold on some of the others? So I think there's just decisions to be made around what triggers a closure. And then the most important thing, whether it's a closure or a merger, is that we have to take care of the students and the families that get the trauma from it. I've been in several closures when I was a network soup. I was through 3 mergers at Tech Boston. They're hard. They're hard because you're taking the culture of one school, the culture of another school, and you're putting them together. So there's strategies that work, you know, sharing staff, you know, having families be able to come in and spend time in the new location and see what it's about. Having older students reach out and mentor younger students that are coming in. There's things you can do to soften them or to make them easier, but they're still tough, and they do have a trauma on the community. So knowing that, I think you want to be clear on what is going to be the criteria for the closure. And I don't know that at this point, but I can imagine that financial will be a component of it, but probably not the only component of it. I think, you know, we do have we have buildings that some of the assets can, through the Green New Deal and other mechanisms, be built back up again, and they can be made, you know, sustainable and safe and, you know, good places to learn. And then there are other buildings that probably are not in that shape and probably can't be, no matter what you put resource toward. So I think that'll unfold as more conversations happen.
Thank you. Appreciate you taking that.
No, you're
curveball.
welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you. We've covered a lot of territory today, and I want to thank my colleagues for their questions, and also want to critically thank you for your thoughtful responses. Now it's your turn to ask us questions. The floor is yours. Take it away. Ms. Sullivan will keep us within time.
Great.
We want to give you an opportunity to have
Thank
some
you.
remarks.
So I guess one of my questions as a candidate, from your perspective as a board, what does year 1 look like for success for me if I were your chosen soup? And what does year 3 look like?
Who would like to take it away? Mr. O'Neill, would you like to start us off?
I'm thinking.
Dr. Alton?
I don't know what's like going first. So I will say also, as someone who is new to the committee too, so I sort of am in this role of understanding the transitional period and the orientation aspect. So one of the first things is in the first year is certainly, I would think, meeting frequently with us to actually talk through the feedback that we've received from the community as to what priorities should be, because, you know, we work for our students, and that also starts with us, particularly at our retreats, understanding like our major priorities and how we're able to communicate that with you. I certainly hear from your responses the idea that no superintendent wants to be thrown a curveball. So I think we would want to also be mindful of what are the situations that you are walking into, not necessarily just from what you hear in media, but also from what we know as well. So I think it's that institutional knowledge that we would first share with you. And then I think, to some extent, you're going to have to do in the first year, again, more listening, particularly to the community about how they want to work with you. And I think setting up that mode of communication sets up your foundation for trust and transparency, which can transfer over into, year three. So year three, also, actually, to step back, also in year one, I think, again, priorities being Black and Brown student achievement, our accountability to our Office of Special Education and our special education learners, our English learners, and our English learners with disabilities. I think setting up stronger checkpoints and for accountability will be essential in that first year too. So I think by year three, hopefully, there's somewhat of a well-oiled machine around those checkpoints. And then, of course, what's the progress on the facilities side, and thinking about how families are understanding that. We've had to work with families to understand that, again, this is not ideal to be going through. Like, many of the changes that we're talking about won't necessarily be experienced by the current student population, and so that's a tough pill to swallow at times. But we need to know that by year three, that we are really moving forward on thinking about where these renovations are going to happen and for whom they're going to happen, and the transparency that you will set up in that first year sets the tone for understanding the racial inequities and the other social inequities that go into those decisions that we disrupt completely. So.
Yeah, any point to that?
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Elkins. I thought that was great, actually. I would like to add to it that we've been in a period of uncertainty now, right? Since it was announced about Superintendent Cacilia several months ago, and we've been undergoing this search process as we come up to the end of a school year, and as our teachers and school leaders and families are reflecting on coming out of the pandemic and back in person. There's a massive upheaval going on across our country, right? So we have teachers retiring, we have school leaders retiring, we have people choosing different careers. So you combine leadership uncertainty and what's going on in folks' lives, and we need to stabilize first and foremost. And so I actually really appreciate the three things you talked about. I think number one is building that diverse, talented, multicultural, multilingual team. That meant a lot that you went right to that, and because you need people that can speak for you. The superintendent cannot do it alone. And school leaders need to know when they're speaking with folks in the bowling building, are they speaking for the superintendent? Is the superintendent going to have their back? Are they working as a cohesive team? So pulling that together, what you identified as your top priority, I happen to agree with. Building the trust and transparency for our families and having a full court press on that. We have heard that so loud and clear, and the fact that you've picked up on that as well. And your third about the systems and structures, what's working and what's not. But, we have the DESE review, and we need that finalized. And we need to look at what we're going to improve on our students with disabilities, our English language learners, our bus transportation, our data. All the issues that are highlighted, we know as a team we need work on. And we need to go full throttle at that right away. The operational areas, need some help as well. We need a teachers' union contract. Luckily, we just have a bus driver's contract, but we need the teachers' union contract settled and agreement so we're all working in the same direction together. We have great partners at BTU, and I'm sure they're committed to it as well, but we need to get this done. Right? So year one is a lot of things that are needed right away. And luckily, you and, the folks we're considering have deep knowledge of Boston, so we don't have to explain to you where all the schools are, right? So operationally hitting the ground And then I think year 3, I would personally expect to see then more progress on the academic side as we straighten out these things in conjunction with what Dr. Elkins just said, and I agree completely. Huge progress on the facility side. Families want to know what the plan is. You know, experience from other cities is when you build new and people see it actually happening, then they're much more accepting of change. When they see that they can get an elementary school that has an auditorium and a cafeteria and a art room and a music room and a science room and so on and so forth, then they're willing to say, okay, maybe the small single-strand school that I love but doesn't have those resources, maybe it makes sense to change. But we can be a cynical city, as you well know, and people want to see progress because they've been promised too much over time, and they want to see progress, and then they want to jump in and believe. So that, to me, is kind of the split between year 1 and year 3, and I think it builds on what Dr. Elkins was saying.
We're going to need to wrap up because we are at our time. However, at this time, I'd like to offer you an opportunity for closing remarks.
Sure, thank you. I mean, I'd just like to thank the broader BPS for a wonderful day. I got to start out very early at an elementary school, and I actually ran into, at that elementary school, they were talking about this wonderful social worker, a great social worker that was there. And I come down, and it's one of my former Tech Boston students. Made my day, just made my week, like amazing. But then just to be able to talk, to hear the thoughtful questions that each of the groups have asked, to hear just kind of the heartfelt concerns, right? Like it just as an educator was really impactful for me. So I just want to say thank you for that and for your thoughtful questions and for the consideration.
Thank you again, Ms. Skipper. I want to remind our audience that we can learn more about the candidates and view recordings of the panel discussions at bostonpublicsschools.org/SUPSearch, SUPT-SEARCH. People are encouraged to email feedback to superintendentsearch@bostonpublicsschools.org, and the committee will be taking a final vote on June 29th at 5 p.m. If there's nothing further, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn this public interview. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any question? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.
No
Looks
roll
like it's
call.
unanimous consent. We're now adjourned. Thank you.
You gotta
Thank
bang
you.
the
Thank
gavel.
you. Oh, I get to bang the gavel.
Thank you, Superintendent.